Transforming Consciousness. I am your host, Vanessa Valdez. Thank you for tuning in Southern California and all over the continent. Today's show will be part of a special series called Sacred Union and Divine Partnership in service to couples and those pursuing partnership during our pandemic. Our guests are a wonderful married couple, Danielle and Jessica DeLeón, both skilled in spiritual psychology. They are here with us today to educate us on relationships as a container for spiritual awakening. For those interested in working with me one-on-one for intuitive therapeutic coaching sessions through Zoom, you can email me at transformingconsciousness@kpfk.org. You can also follow me on Instagram under Transforming Consciousness to obtain information on special perks I offer to new clients. For details, you can go to my Instagram page, Transforming Consciousness. Our special guests for today, Daniel DeLeón and his wife, Jessica. Daniel is a graduate of the University of Santa Monica, where he studied spiritual psychology. He works in the real estate industry as founder and chief executive officer of Peerless Group. Through his continued financial success, Daniel and his team have built 5 homes for impoverished families in Latin America. When he is not working, Daniel is devoted to his loving family and continues to deepen his spiritual practices. Through his heart-centered business philosophy and general care and compassion, Daniel has found and continues to find great success in his vocation and sacred marriage with Jessica. On the other side, Jessica DeLeón is a teacher, healer, and also graduate of the University of Santa Monica, where she studied spiritual psychology, working for a conscious financial lending group that allowed her gifts of teaching and facilitating. Jessica now leads by example, sharing her love, light, and professional wisdom with people seeking clarity and purpose. She has a counseling practice, DeLeón Consulting, but SOUL, where she facilitates clients through the principles and practices of spiritual psychology. Do you both want to say hi to the listeners?
Hello, everyone.
Hey, everyone.
Well, before we bring them on air, I would like to begin with a brief meditation so that we may be more open and grounded during our time together. If you are driving, it is highly recommended that you tune in after the meditation has come to completion in 2 minutes. Sit in a comfortable position, keeping your back straight to align the chakra column. Take a deep breath in. Exhale. We will begin. We call ourselves forward. We ask. We ask that any fear, frustration, imbalance, restriction, limitation, any repressed feelings, any barrier that we built against the awareness of who we truly are, be released and taken into the higher realms of consciousness. We ask that we be grounded and protected by our spirit guides that are always present in service to us. May this show focused on sacred union and divine partnership provide the listeners clarity and understanding to tap into this energy with their current partners or the new to come. Let us now focus into the stillness of our awareness with the intention of fully receiving the message during the show, knowing that we are in the presence of love despite sudden global changes, and we embrace this energy wherever we go. Moments of silence to bring you back into your body. Listening listening to Transforming Consciousness. I am your host, Vanessa Valdez. Today, our special guests are Daniel and Jessica DeLeón, both graduates of the University of Santa Monica, where they both studied spiritual psychology and now live by these principles of spiritual psychology in their sacred union as a married couple. They are here to educate us on relationships as a container for spiritual awakening in service to all of you during our current COVID-19 pandemic. Jessica and Daniel, it is such an honor to have you join the conversation today.
Thank you, Vanessa. We're so happy to be here with you.
Thank you for having us.
I would like for you to begin by sharing your dark night of the soul story pertaining to relationships and how it was precisely that dark night of the soul story that redirected your path to evolving and healing yourself to be better prepared for each other when the time came. Why don't we start with Jessica?
Thanks, Vanessa. So when I think about my dark night of the soul as it pertains to my awarenesses around relationships, I think of the partner I had prior to Daniel. We were in relationship. I was witnessing the dismantling of my parents' marriage during this time. So I hadn't gone to USM yet, so I didn't fully have the tools and skills that I have now. And it was through this relationship, it was a specific conversation actually where I was telling this gentleman, how intelligent he was and how he had a specific soul purpose on this planet and he really needed to step out and share his soul mission. And I had this moment of clarity where I could see that this message that I was trying to deliver for him was for me. And it was the first time in my life that I was really able to see how I was projecting. And I was able to see that it was time for me to do my soul work and that I had moved from one relationship to another, to another, to another, and never really been alone with myself. And so it was in that awareness that I ended the relationship and started to do my work and started becoming comfortable with being alone. And very shortly after, I met Daniel.
Beautiful. How about you, Daniel?
Well, for me, I had created this pattern as well, going from relationship to relationship since I was 16. And I've been working in self-development probably since I was 22, 23. I was married. So I was married, I had kids. And then from there, I had a relationship after a relationship. And my last relationship before meeting Jessica, I actually was with someone who was going to USM. And, I was reading all the books that she was reading. She ended up moving on and we still were friends and we still had like sort of a relationship when I started USM, and I was still on my pattern. I couldn't be by myself. So if she would call or she would ask to meet, I would say yes, until one day it just clicked to me. And it's just like, I cannot be on a relationship where there's not a relationship. So we ended up in good terms and I began my journey being by myself. And it was really hard. It was really, really hard. I struggled for like 3 or 4 months going through that pain of wanting to have someone there, wanting to have that person in my life. And finally, I realized that I was the one that I was looking for. I was the person who I wanted the love from. I was seeking for this love and approval, and finally it clicked. It was me. I was the one that I was looking for. And from there, everything just opened. And I really got into myself and loving myself. I went through dating myself. I would purchase flowers for myself. All these things that I wanted to do for another person or another woman, I was doing it for myself. So I took myself to, dinners by myself, enjoying myself, flowers for myself, and really enjoyed that part of myself. So it was for those 3 months was really hard. And when I was able to click, things started getting better. And without seeking for a partnership, that's how I met Jessica. And then our journey started.
Beautiful. Well, wow, what a trajectory, I will say. And I'm paying special attention to this thread around both of your stories. And for the listeners that are tuned in, because you both happen to talk about isolation but in a different way, even though everything is interconnected around having the relationship with self, right? And coming to that realization that oftentimes certain situations, relationships are not meant to be forever. However, they're meant to be there to support you in your individuation process. So for you, Danielle, of my understanding of what you're sharing is, within this prior relationship of bringing you into that realization of the importance of having this relationship with self so that you could be fully prepared for, in this case, when Jessica arrived. And then Jessica, I think it's fascinating how you share, again, for the listeners that are tuned in, as we are incubated, not isolated, incubated, to consider reflecting around this. Oftentimes you are in relationships and you're actually able to see what I call a positive projection, not a negative projection, but you're actually able to see someone and say, listen, you're spiritual, you're intelligent, everything else that Jessica mentioned. So what a beautiful realization, again, to tap into, wait a second, that may be something for me to tap into my own innate gifts. And so again, by the end of the day, all our relationships are in service to us, in support of our evolution in life and coming together with the person that our soul is meant to. So I really appreciate both of you sharing so openly. And really, too, as you both know, part of my wanting to create a series around sacred union and divine partnership was this correlation around meeting with clients, having just random conversations with friends, people that I had just met around this incubation. And so people are coming into a realization that, did I marry the right person for me? Did I come together with a person because my soul wanted, or was it my egocentric ways of being? So people right now, as we speak, as you're tuned in with us, it's really about unveiling the shadow. And this is part of when it comes to these series that I'm creating, to unveil the shadow and come into a realization without any judgment of why you are in your situation. So as we're incubated, we are facing what we were not wanting to face before. And so we were avoiding it. So this is a beautiful time as we're coming together, us three and the listeners that are tuned in, to come into that realization and ask yourselves, what is it that I have been avoiding in resonance to relationship? And what do I need to face in order to heal and be able to move on to the next endeavor in my life with the person that my soul is asking of me? And that's the reason why you're both here. Now, Jessica and Danielle, when it comes to words, right, divine partnership, sacred union, oftentimes, let's be realistic, it can just be concepts. And people can lecture around them. They can teach them, but they're just concepts. And so you're in this series because you are a manifestation of what I would consider not just concepts, but you're living proof. You're in this relationship partnership together and experiencing what this really represents. On that note, for both of you, we can start with Jessica. What does sacred union and divine partnership mean to you, and how does it show up in your marriage?
Well, we could just talk about this for days and days, but I think my awareness began when Daniel was pretty early on in our relationship. I recognized that Daniel was perfectly packaged to trigger my deepest wounds, things that I didn't have access to, aspects of myself that I didn't have awareness around, essentially blind spots. And I noticed that I was perfectly packaged to do the same thing for him as well. And I think that in typical relationships, when we're confronted with our shadow, it's easier to separate. It takes a lot of courage to do the work that Daniel and I are doing. And I really acknowledge us and commend us for it, because it's not easy and it's not pretty and it's really scary at times. So I view our partnership as sacred, as divine, as a commitment that we made before we were incarnated. I think that I believe, I know in my bones that Daniel and I are together on this planet during this time for a reason, and we're here to help each other evolve in consciousness. And when we had our ceremony of marriage and we'd made these declarations to each other and to our family and our loved ones, it's profound. It really is a spiritual partnership and promises that we're going to hold space for each other so that we can grow as much as possible in this lifetime.
Beautiful. Grow as much as possible in this lifetime. Absolutely. How about you, Daniel?
For me, it's having the patterns of going from relationship to relationship and then meeting Jessica at a perfect time where I was evolving into healing my own woundings and understanding my patterns, I see on her that the level of commitment that she and I have. So in relationships, a lot of times it's easier to just say, "Oh, I'm done. I cannot do this anymore," and just separate because I was that person at one point. And being in this sacred relationship with Jessica, we know there is no way that we won't do everything that we can to move through any issue that we might come with. We'll always do our best to work together and to take the time that we need to take in order to process our own woundings and then come back in love and move forward. And a lot of times that's what happens. That in relationship in the past for me was that either I wanted to don't do the work and just leave because it's easier, because it's painful and I don't want to see my wounds.
Right.
And now it's different because I have someone who is willing to sit in the fire with me. So that is the part that when I felt that in my soul, it's like, holy smokes, this is the person who I'm going to be with. Because it's in the courage of one person to really inspire, at least for me, inspire me to say, this person is here with me no matter what. No matter how much I trigger her, she's going to be here with me doing the work. And that's what our journey has been. You know, it hasn't been easy. There's things that came up at the beginning of our relationship, and we've been working and working and working. And every time gets easier because once I heal one part of myself, it heals hers. And it's this back and forth that we have been able to do. And that's sacred union for me because it's not just rainbows and unicorns, you know, it is work. And there's times of just ecstasy and bliss and beauty and love. And also there's the other side where it's work and it's dark and it can at times feel maybe painful. However, it is for us to look into those parts, at least for me, to look at those parts of myself that I still need to heal, that I still need to give love to, identifying those things to really sit down and sit with it and let it move through it and heal it little by little. So being in a sacred partnership with Jessica, I feel like I hit the lottery because to me it's finding the person who is able to sit on the fire with you. It's not very easy to find because that person has to be courageous. And I had to be courageous to sit there with her.
Absolutely. So, wow, Daniel, yeah. That was quite the journey that you delved us into. And Jessica, I promise you, I did not pay him to say all that. I feel this is a beautiful just awakening for all of us to come into that realization of how beautiful is it when in partnership you can talk about each other so profoundly, but that it's authentic and that it's real. And through that, as you well mentioned, Daniel, I'm with you on that. And I'm sure many that are tuned in right now, it's about really coming into the realization, what is true partnership, right? What are fireworks? Fireworks, actually, what I'm understanding what you're saying is coming into union with someone that can sit with you. And that fire that you talk about, someone that you feel open enough that you know for a fact that you're not going to be judged. However, they're so intrigued by you. They want to know your darkness. They want to know what is your shadow aspect. And I'm not running away if you show me. I'm here with you no matter what. And that's what I take from your share. So I think it's just wonderful how you've been able to implement that because oftentimes I get asked from my clients around, the quote unquote perfect relationship. And I feel that as a collective within this pandemic, perhaps part of this realization is to change the Disney narrative. Changing the Disney narrative of, first of all, women don't want to be saved. It's not about saving women. It's about coming together in this union and this collaboration that will also involve shadow work. So true sacred relationship is how willing are you to work with each other on all levels, and that will include the shadow aspect, because that's really what it comes down to. And again, Daniel, referencing back to what you shared, that's part of what we're going to continue to discuss. And I think it's beautiful that you already did. So then, Jessica, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, the Disney narrative. I definitely grew up with programming around what a successful relationship looks like. I was brought up by parents who, didn't have arguments in front of us. Everything was done behind closed doors as far as upsets. And so I spent my entire life seeing my parents never having an argument in front of us, but always recognizing that there was tension when there was tension. And I think that a lot of us look at our parents as the people that are going to teach us how to be a good husband and how to be a good wife. And sometimes our parents are there to teach us what not to do. And that's one of the things that I've acknowledged in our relationship is that just because there's an upset coming up or a challenge or friction, that's the curriculum. That's fertile territory right there. And it's not something to sweep under the rug or to distract ourselves from. When there's an upset, that deserves honor and time and energy and lots of love. And so I think there's this really unhealthy misconception that successful relationships aren't having upsets. The opposite is true. Daniel and I have upsets. And in the beginning of our relationships, they were pretty ugly. Now there's a lot of grace and a lot of compassion and a lot of forgiveness. And we move through things much more quickly than we did in the past. But when there's an upset, we both know, okay, school's in session. Let's do this. What's really going on here?
Absolutely. Amen to that. And I will tell you, Jessica, I always say that my listeners have been growing with me during the time span of transforming consciousness. And because we're all interconnected and we're having this conversation dialogue around conscious partnership, and you're both sharing with us around what does that mean to you. On that note, I'm curious to ask both of you, we'll go now to Danielle, around navigating these upsets and challenges. You've been talking about it, but now when it comes to actually embodying it and being in a situation, I like to call it a vignette. So if you can actually share with me, Danielle, a current situation or a past situation, again, because we're navigating upsets and challenges with your relationship with Jessica, and how were you in that situation and how was it resolved?
I think with the current situation, I believe it was as early as a few days ago, where I woke up really, really heavy with everything that is happening in the world. I was feeling a lot of pressure because business has kind of slowed down and felt the pressure of the finances. And I woke up really, really heavy to the point that I was just releasing and crying, with this. And I was able to sit down with my wife and share with her what was happening. And the questions that she asked with so much compassion, and with not judgment, and gave me guidance into that. So, even though I thought that I was going to be getting schooled on, or she was going to say something that I wasn't going to like, actually she's opened up and gave me guidance and listened to me and helped me and really let me move through my own darkness or my own grief, if you will. Because I really felt, as a man, we're taught that we're the providers, that we're the ones that need to go and fight the dragons and make sure that we take care of our family, which,
Right.
in a sense is true. And I was having challenges with that because of the current situation. And in a way, I, was asking for help. And my wife, instead of taking it as I was blaming her or saying, that I needed more help on her end, she just listened to me and asked me just questions and helped me move through that, and gave me some pointers that I was able to take, go to another room, do some free-form writing, do some self-forgiveness, and the day got a little better. And I think that's so important because even though I was coming with this heaviness in, I said things that she could have seen it as I was complaining and sort of saying that she needed to do something about it. She took the time to just sit down and listen with an open heart and just be there for me, So instead of we taking a route of upset, it just was totally different. After I went through all that, I felt like, oh my God, I'm sorry, that I said, I'm sorry I went through this and that I dumped all this into you. And it's okay. This is what we're here for. And that's the level where we have gotten now. This conversation 2 years ago, it would have been totally different. It would have gone to a different level, but that was an upset from on my end that I was feeling heavy and I was feeling hopeless, if you will. And having a wife, a partner who's there for me, that instead of taking it personal, she took it with an open heart and knew that what I was going through, it had nothing to do with her, but it was my own inner wounding that I'm still working every day, that I still work through when these things come forward.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Daniel. And let me ask you, I would only imagine that you felt better after?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I mean, she's a great coach. Even though we have an agreement that we won't coach each other, we're there to listen to each other. We don't tell people what to do, but we ask each other questions that we can find our own answers. And that's what we've been doing now.
Beautiful, Daniela. Well, I'll tell you my take on that. And for the listeners that are tuned in around what I'm calling a vignette, you're giving us a real world reality story of a situation around upsets and challenges. So for the people that are, obviously in the pandemic and they're experiencing a lot of challenges within their partnerships, within their own self, you name it, fill in the blanks, it's happening. And so what I take from your share is having, whether it's you, we're going to have shortly Jessica share her own vignette, having someone to hold space, to know how to hold space, to release the judgment, to learn not just by concept, but by virtue, just the gift of listening. And so when it comes to listening and hearing are so different. When you're hearing, you are in your brain. But when you actually allow yourself to tap into your soul, that's when you're actually listening. That's when you're actually listening to your partner. As what I'm understanding, Jessica held space in that way. And it allows you, as you all said, to really open up, don't feel judged. And very importantly, too, when you're in a situation of darkness, for the other counterparty, in this case, your partner, Jessica, again, for the listeners that are tuned in, that are dealing with these challenges, to allow yourself not to take it personal. The world does not revolve around you. It's not about you. It's about holding space for your partner that is going through a really dark time. So if you can hold space and if you can listen and if you can let go of any judgments, and as you mentioned, she was able to provide what you said in your own words, these pointers that I understand were able to fill in those blind spots. So when you come together in sacred union, it's about that. It's about filling each other's blind spots because no one is perfect and not one person knows everything. And again, this is raw, true union, divine partnership. Jessica, would you like to share your own personal vignette?
Yeah, so one of the really important, I think, skills and understandings that really helped Daniel and I is in the past, when I would get triggered and I'd be in my upset, that charge would then trigger Daniel. And then we would both be in upset and we would both be triggered. And then it would become this, argument, upset, back and forth. I'm upset because we're just playing tug of war, essentially. And when that happens, nothing good comes from that level of relating. And so one of the really important skills that we've learned is identifying who's really struggling right now. And I think, it's like iron sharpening iron. There are days where I'm highly, highly connected to Daniel energetically. So there are times where I know that he's in upset before he even knows that he's in upset. And I have a choice. How do I want to show up for him? And if I'm taking really, really good care of myself and I'm doing my self-counseling and I'm taking care of myself physically, mentally, emotionally, energetically, spiritually, then I'm rock solid. It doesn't matter what Daniel goes through. I can hold space for him all day long. It's when I'm not taking good care of myself that I'm not able to show up for him in a high level of awareness. And then I can take things personally and it becomes now we're both in the upset together. And so I think that's something that I really try to share with other couples is identify who's really struggling the most, who's the most triggered. And if you can see that your partner is the most triggered, then put your ego aside and put your material on the shelf to unpack later and hold space for that person. And it doesn't matter. I think there's a big misconception between me being female and Daniel being male that somehow, if he's having a moment of vulnerability And there's a lot of tenderness there. Essentially, he's in a more feminine energetic space. It's okay for me to show up in my masculine energy, and to be rooted and grounded and reminding him of what we know to be true. So Daniel and I have really learned this dance between sometimes he's in his feminine energy and I'm in my masculine energy, and sometimes I'm in my feminine energy and he's in his masculine energy. And we're able to support and do this energetic dance together that's really profound.
Absolutely. I love how you shed light into this dance because as a dancer, I truly believe that dance is parallel to life. It's parallel to partnerships. My intention, my trust is that the more that we truly talk about it as it is, humanity will evolve. And part of that, being able to evolve is how can we relate with one another? So I love that you share that. And also, too, that you touch on feminine and masculine energies. I've had shows in the past where we talk about it, and we're going to continue to in this series because I think it's fundamentally important. I feel that people have had a misrepresentation. Daniel, going back to you briefly, I love how you talk about this whole paradigm around how men should be, right? So if you come from a Latino culture, which I understand and we're going to delve into, it's this concept around, los niños no lloran, kids don't cry, so stop crying. So you hear a lot of that. And of course, another culture. So then you start to believe and have this belief system in your subconscious. It resides there. And then you start believing as you get older in relationships that you have to man up. And so you don't show up authentically. And then you repress a lot of your feelings that later just become turmoil. So I think it's important to be able to talk about feminine and masculine energies and the realization that it's not about being stagnant in one energy. You can maneuver the energy. It's about communication. If you can have that dialogue with your partner in a very raw way, where it's not insulting, but if you can hold space and come to that realization that it's okay. So for the man, the feminine, and the masculine listeners tuned in right now, for the male energy, I want you to know that it's okay for you to reside in your feminine. In fact, it's highly encouraged if you want to become balanced within yourself, to give yourself the opportunity to cry when needed. As you well heard Daniel, he needed a moment to cry, and his divine goddess, it was okay for her to be in her masculine of grounded and rooted to be able to hold space. Now, as I've been doing more coaching, what I've come into my own realization, and even within my own personal endeavors, the issue becomes when you're both in the same energy, and then you don't know what to do with that energy. But remember, again, listeners, you can actually maneuver and shift the energy. It's okay. And I love how you tapped into that. Is there anything else there that you would like to share, Jessica, in resonance to this?
I think there is a distortion in the New Age community when we talk about sacred union, and there's this concept of like twin flames, and that somehow I'm half a soul and Daniel's the other half of my soul. And I really feel that there's a distortion there. I think that promotes some type of victim storyline. I can only show up as a mother, as a daughter, as a sister, as a wife when I'm well on all aspects of my life. And the only person that's responsible for my wellness is me. And so that's something that I really want people to understand, is that relationships are just a reflection of your inner reality. And that's what's so wonderful and so important about relationships, is it's a mirror. So what I judge in Daniel or anybody else is really an aspect of myself that I'm disowning. And so when we talk about sacred union in relationships, it's really about sacred union in myself, sacred union and the divine marriage of my masculine and feminine energy inside myself, my capacity to mother myself and father myself. And that's really coming from a place of fullness. And from there, I'm overflowing with love and energy and a capacity to be with suffering. That's what compassion means. That's the etymology of compassion, to be with suffering. And you can only be with someone else's suffering to the depth that you're able to be with your own suffering.
Yes. And speaking of, in regards to these percentages for the people that are tuned in, it's my belief, my understanding, my background, my own personal endeavors, because you learn a lot through trial and error out of your own personal endeavors around this percentage, around, meeting your other half. meeting your other 50%. As we are in this pandemic, perhaps part of, going into evolving humanity is coming into that realization of what you're sharing, Jessica, the wholeness, the fullness. It's not about meeting your other half. It's about you being your 100%. So that when you come together in union of another person, then that's true prosperity and abundance, because that's 200%. So why not? Why not reach for the highest, knowing that you are showing up in your 100%? And where does that take the listeners? To know that if at any given point in time, because this is raw partnership, this is what we're talking about here in Transforming Consciousness. What if, let's say, what if one of the individuals in the partnership becomes ill? You want to make sure that you are at your 100% so that you can be able to show up in that way for yourself, and that you're better prepared for what is to come. It's not in your 50% that you're going to be able to help yourself or the other person. So absolutely, Jessica, I'm with you. And I love that you continue to shed light into taking care of yourself. The only way you can be there for someone else in support, in a healing, whatever position that you're in, is by first focusing it on yourself, being your 100%. And so we're going to continue delving into this. Daniel, when it comes to, let's see here. I mean, I love talking about relationships and partnerships. I can be here all day with both of you, as Jessica will mention earlier. I mean, the content is so rich and it's so yummy, and there's so much to delve into that I'm only trusting that the listeners are gaining a lot of golden nuggets from this. And on that note, within the conscious realm, we hear a lot of sacred sexuality. And I have clients, and again, within my gals, my girlfriends, we have this dialogue around what is true intimacy. So I would love to, delve more now into this intimacy. And what does intimacy mean to you, Daniel?
Oh my God.
That's a great way to start. Oh my God.
I get chills, right? I haven't even said anything yet, but I'm getting chills. For me right now, having the relationship with my wife in this incarnation, I feel so blessed and so grateful, because in the intimacy, we have worked so much into really coming together, not just into the physical world, but the spiritual world. Like when we interconnect and we really are in that dance that Jessica was talking before, we enter into that dance of our own sexuality, that is sacred sexuality, and that we are moving in a way that it is magical. I have learned to listen to her without she saying anything. And she has taught me the way that she will, go into that trance when we are in that intimacy. And those experiences that we have every time, it just gets better and better. And I think it's we both being so vulnerable and so open and so 100% there with each other, that we are able to go to realms in the universe that we never thought, at least for myself, I never thought it was possible. And I believe that this has to do a lot with our own healing, obviously, how I work on my own and how she was working on her own. And when we come into these intimacy times, we are just, I'm not thinking about anything else, but I'm just there. I'm present 100% as she is. And we're able to have this spiritual feelings. It's very hard to express what the feelings. I just can tell you that I get chills by talking about it, because it's just, I can feel it in my body right now, how that feels when I'm with my wife in that intimacy time.
Oh my, that sounds like a real spiritual orgasm.
Yes, baby.
Oh my God, I was going to say that. I didn't know if I was able to say that, but yes.
Well,
that's exactly what it is.
As an intuitive, I was able to feel you, and I sensed that there was some sort of I'm wanting to say that, but that's really what it comes down to. And so Transforming Consciousness is a raw, authentic, real program. where we here are able to know the real meaning of orgasm, not the one that we've been told. So we're able, and it's okay for us, we have permission to be able to say spiritual orgasm, because that's what you basically conveyed to us. And my understanding as you were sharing is it almost feels like this cosmic connectivity.
Yes.
It's profound. The cosmos are involved. Oh my goodness, I love this.
Yes.
Jessica, would you like to share more?
Well, the phrase that's coming forward is that message from Jung that says that no tree can grow to heaven without its roots firmly down in hell. And I think that the work that Daniel and I do, call it shadow work or however you want to describe it, but we have such a depth in our relationship. And because of that depth, we can reach high heights. They're directly in relationship to each other. And thank God we have very important, very powerful spiritual beliefs that we both agree on. And we practice our spirituality together in multiple modalities, whether it's breath work or meditation or yoga or plant medicine ceremonies. I'm a Karuna Reiki master, and Daniel is Reiki attuned as well. So, you combine all of these modalities and then you bring that into your sexuality, and it is difficult to put into words. I mean, it's really, really powerful and healing and transformative and transcendent. I mean, I'm so lucky. That's all I can say.
You're both very lucky. And I will say, even though you both mentioned the same around just challenging to put it into words, but I will tell you that you've both done such a remarkable, I wouldn't say job, but such a remarkable way of delving myself and the listeners into this journey around what does sacred sexuality truly mean when it comes to what is true intimacy. So I just really want to acknowledge you for that, because I can understand how sometimes, it may seem like it's a little challenging to put it into words, and it absolutely is. It's rather to really be with the experience, but you've done both a phenomenal job. And by the end of the day, I will tell you both that in my own philosophy, in my own experience, that once properly aligned with your mate, everything happens naturally. And then you're capable of experiencing that cosmic connectivity that I talk about and that explosive intimacy. So for the listeners that are tuned in, I would only trust that you have been able to gain the real definition around intimacy, not the one that you've been told. So are you both enjoying this so far?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. We could talk about this forever. This is our... We love talking about the unseen.
Absolutely. And speaking of the unseen, right? Because, Carl Jung, as you well mentioned, he talks a lot about delving into the unseen. To be able to understand the seen is tapping into the underworld. That's the word that he uses. So when you delved us into that quote, I believe you mentioned, no tree can grow its roots without going to hell. Absolutely. And that's what true partnership is all about. To be able to be courageous enough to trust each other, to go into the underworld of those roots so that you can come out and blossom together into the tree that you clearly both are, and that the listeners that are tuned in are as well. So again, I think it's just wonderful what you've been able to share with us. Another thing too that I'd love to shed light into is because, again, it's where did this experience, journey, idea came into mind around a series around sacred union and divine partnership was around my clients. So I just want to give a special shout out to my clients and my friends for the wonderful conversations that we've been having around this, that it occurred to me, the word that came through was urgent. It's urgent right now to be able to have a dialogue around divine partnership. And with that also too, the demons around why did you truly marry? So some of what I've been experiencing is this concept around biracial marriage. And so I understand what you both have shared, that you are in a biracial marriage. How have these cultural differences enhanced and also too challenged your togetherness?
I'll start. I think for me, I came to the States at 21 from Guatemala. So I basically, all my childhood and teenage, I spent it in Guatemala. So I lived half of my life in Guatemala. I'm 43 now. And I think the beauty of being in a bicultural, I don't want to call it biracial, because I think it's only one human race. For me, it's more bicultural relationship. and it's how similar we are in a lot of parts. Jessica has this beautiful family who stay together and they're always celebrating each other and they have that truly family-oriented way to live their lives. And that's the way I grew up with my uncles around me and cousins and all this. And so that's beauty to be in partnership with. I can relate with. And the challenges, I think, is that sometimes it's just probably the way I communicate sometimes. I say things that when I translate it in my head might not come right. But my wife is so beautiful and she just laughs at it. She loves my accent. And when I mispronounce things, she helps me out and help me with that. So I think there's more gifts than challenges, and I enjoy every single one of it.
Beautiful. How about you, Jessica?
Well, it's interesting being a Caucasian, American white woman, having a fiery Latin husband provides so much texture and fun. And I find myself, I'm very curious about Daniel. He grew up very differently than I did, but yet our core values are the same. And for me, I can't imagine being in partnership with anyone else, especially somebody who has the same upbringing as me. I think that the fact that there's these layers and it provides a texture to our relationship. I think he's fascinating. I love his accent. It's interesting because I grew up in, Southern California, and my first words were actually in Spanish. I spoke Spanish before I spoke English. I wouldn't say I'm fluent, but looking back at my life, there's all these cornerstones of how I was being shaped to be ready for Daniel and to be a stepmother to our children. And it's not the way that I thought it was going to be, in high school, thinking about what my partner would be like. I thought that, I would be his first wife and we would have, our children together. And that wasn't the package that it came in. And that is what makes it so delicious, because it's always different. There's always something to look forward to. There's always more layers and learning, and I'm never bored.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. That was really profound, Jessica, how you touch into these differences. And oftentimes, particularly women, if we go back into this Disney narrative that we've been accustomed to seeing and portraying and trying to manifest through vision boards, you name it. When you're manifesting, your ego is not necessarily manifesting this person will be married and I will meet him, he'll be divorced and he'll have children. But what if we start, again, going into the pandemic, what if we start reflecting around, let's let go of what we think we want and how about what we need?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's clear to me with your both sharing that your soul, where you are with your union right now, it's exactly what your soul needs. And same goes for Daniel. And around these differences that you both talk about, these core values, it reminds me of my relationship coaches. I have mentioned to me something that I would laugh a lot about before, but now I'm coming into my own realization that yes, absolutely yes. They once said to me 5 years ago, when it comes to partnership, be with someone who is so different as you can withstand. And I thought, absolutely not. I want to date myself. Well, that never really worked out. And so I love how you shed light into that because, again, to the listeners that are tuned in, opposites attract. Opposites is actually the way to go. Now, with that, it doesn't mean that if you go the other way around, you will be wounded. Absolutely not. It will be part of your curriculum of what maybe you need to learn. But when it really comes to real, raw, divine, sacred union, go with someone that is as different as you can withstand. And with that, Jessica, I will say, it's good that you mentioned that because when it comes to the core values, that's what we want to make sure that that's the same. It's about the core values. Mm-hmm. Everything else can be different, but the core values need to be the same. So thank you for sharing that. Well, in my mind, I have like 20,000 questions that I want to ask. And of course, everything is time nowadays. So I want to be mindful of our time. But as we're coming close to a completion, what advice do you both have for the couples that are tuned in right now that are beginning this spiritual journey together? Let's start with Daniel.
Well, I think for my brothers out there, I just want to say that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to have feelings, and it's okay to say, I can't do this, or it's okay to ask for help. I think a lot of us have grown up, like as you mentioned before, kids don't cry, men has to do this, has to do that. And in this pandemic, or in this incubation that you mentioned before, we are sitting down with our partners, and there's a lot of friction, a lot of things happening. And as a man, we tend, at least for myself, I used to tend to just put everything aside until I will blow up. And then when someone doesn't process things and then one day it just explodes, nothing good comes out of it, because that's what it comes, the separation and the divorces and all the many things that can happen. So for my brothers out there, what I would say is, listen, it's okay to be vulnerable. And I would probably even offer them to look on the book, The Way of the Superior Man, and how it shares how the masculine and the feminine energy, we can share it. I can have it move, like Jessica was saying before. I can move to my feminine energy and be vulnerable and be raw and be okay with everything that is happening. And my wife can be in her masculine energy and grounded when I need the help. So I think a secret partnership, it has to do a lot with owning your wounds. No one can hurt you. No one can make you feel bad unless I already have it. So if I already have that wound, it can be my wife, it can be my kids, it can be some other person that will say something that will touch it. And if I don't process it, it will never go away. And that's how patterns continue to be.
Beautiful, Daniel. Well, thank you for that. And it seems to me that the golden nugget that you're offering the listeners is particularly for the men to allow yourselves to be vulnerable and open up. And also, too, thank you for the suggestion. I believe you mentioned the book, The Way of the Superior Man. For those that are tuned in, the author is David Data. He's great. I would highly recommend that you look into his work in order to be able to enhance your relationships. Now, how about you, Jessica?
Well, since Daniel spoke to the masculine, I guess I'll speak to the feminine. Speaking to my sisters, I think the most important principle to understand is that outer experience is a reflection of our inner reality. So anytime we're seeking for something outside of ourselves, there's a distortion. So as it pertains to the relationship, if there's something that you want your partner to say or do because it would make you feel better, at the end of the day, he's not responsible for you feeling well. You're responsible for feeling well. So I think self-love is so important, but that doesn't mean face masks and spa days. That means really sitting with the uncomfortable parts of ourselves, really looking at our victim storylines, really looking at the wounded feminine aspects and taking ownership of them, and not expecting your partner or anybody else to make you feel a certain way, to make you feel happy or to make you feel valued or accepted or what have you. And I think right now, I'll use the word lockdown, my personal sense is that this COVID-19 experience is a fear purge, meaning that it's created a container for all of us to be confronted with our worst fears. And so the things that we've been ignoring or distracting ourselves from, there's no getting away from it right now. So whatever's coming up in your relationship is the most important thing that you can process at this time. And if you're in a statement where you're saying to yourself, I'm upset because he did this, he did that, whatever your grievance is, I would offer you to turn that statement in on yourself. So if you feel like your man betrayed you, how have you betrayed yourself? And I think that for me, one of my biggest lessons that I've learned in relationship with Daniel is healing my own wounded masculine energy. It's very easy for us in this feminist culture to say, F the patriarchy, and that the men are essentially what's ruining life on earth. And that is not true.
Absolutely.
There are past aspects of myself when I find myself in deep judgment over Daniel. When I really sit with what's present, that judgment is a reflection of my own wounded masculine energy.
Absolutely. So that's a wonderful message. Thank you for that, Jessica. For the divine feminine that are tuned in right now around using this opportunity, as you well mentioned, the wounding masculine in you that energy that you've been avoiding to face because of work, because you've been busy, well, this is the time. This may well be the time of your life to be able to face that in order to heal it. And that's how you're able to attract a different man in your life, right? Because that's where we're heading into. And self-care, as you will mention, Jessica, absolutely. Self-care is not going to the spa. It's not getting your nails done. Thankfully, we actually can't do that right now, which is great. Self-care, or at least during the pandemic, women will learn, and also men, that self-care is about healing your wounds, whichever they may be, whether that's healing the masculine or healing the feminine. So I love that you mentioned that as we're coming into completion. Now, for those that may be interested in learning more about DeLeón Consulting, which is with Soul, CONSOULTING, where can they obtain information, Jessica?
So you can follow DeLeón Consulting on Facebook and Instagram. You can also email me at jessica@DeLeónConsulting, spelled SOUL.com.
Beautiful. Well, it's been a great pleasure to have you both join Transforming Consciousness and our special series of Sacred Union and Divine Partnership.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. We love you.
I take this opportunity to thank all the listeners for tuning in, my engineer and producer Mark Maxwell, and everyone at KPFK that, despite our current pandemic, are doing their best to offer segments in support of your current situation of COVID-19. For those interested in following me, you can follow me on Instagram under Transforming Consciousness. I leave you with the following quote for your contemplation of today's show. When people get married because they think it's a long-time love affair, they will be divorced. Because all love affairs end in disappointment. Marriage is a recognition of spiritual identity. Joseph Campbell. This has been Transforming Your Consciousness with Vanessa Valdez. Till next time.